Hello everyone. This is Dr. Richa this side, and today I will be starting a series of lectures on the various allied health courses, starting from the foundational subjects like anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, expanding them to also include psychology and sociology. The phase 2 of my lecture series will include the core courses in Bachelor of Physiotherapy BPT first year subjects, which will help to build on the foundational allied health sciences, concluding to phase 3 with core Bachelor of Physiotherapy BPT courses like kinesiology, kinesiotherapy, biomechanics, electrotherapy, and many more. So, in this series of today, I'll be starting with neuroanatomy. In today's class, I'll be talking about introduction and organization of the nervous system. What you can expect in this series is how is the nervous system organized, wherein I'll be talking about the basic organization of the nervous system, the main structures that form the nervous system, how the nervous system is classified into a central nervous system, that is the CNS, and a peripheral nervous system, that is the PNS, and what is the internal structure of the spinal cord. So, coming to the very first idea of what is the central nervous system or the nervous system. The nervous system is the body's chief center of control and communication. It is a network built on specialized cells. What are these specialized cells called as? These cells are called as neurons. The functional unit that make up the nervous system in human body is the neurons. These neurons help you to generate and transmit the electrical signals to coordinate each and every voluntary and involuntary movement. Your nervous system is divided into two, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central stands for something that is the master of the nervous system. That is, the brain and the spinal cord are the two master centers in the nervous system. Hence, these centers or these masters regulate the entire body. They master the nervous system and they regulate your entire body. The brain and the spinal cord are the main processing centers which will give command to your nervous system, the remaining nervous system. It will receive, interpret, and coordinate responses to information. Whereas peripheral nervous system acts as an auxiliary part of the central nervous system, meaning it will moreover help to provide assistance to the master. It will act as an assistant to the master, wherein it will include 12 pair of cranial nerves, meaning those nerves which originate from the cranium or the skull or the brain, and 31 pair of spinal nerves originating from the spinal cord. These peripheral nervous system components, that is 12 cranial nerve pairs and 31 spinal nerve pairs, connect the CNS or the masters to the rest of the body. As there has to be someone who should tell what is happening all over in the body and take that information and give it to the masters who are going to decide each and every voluntary and involuntary movement. So they will receive these components of peripheral nervous system will receive the information from the rest of the body about what is going on in the entire body in terms of both sensations called as a sensory input and in terms of the motor output. What is the output going to be? So both of these information, the sensory input and what the result is going to be, motor output, both will be transferred to this master to decide on. Next, for us to understand more about the CNS, we should understand the master organ, that is the brain. So when we go to the classification of the parts of the brain, we look at the embryological classification first. Embryologically, or as per the growth of the parts of the brain from the neural tube, from something called as the neural tube, there are parts of the brain that arise from this neural tube when a fetus develops in the mother's womb. The brain divides itself into three parts in terms of the embryology as prosencephalon, which is called the forebrain, mesencephalon called as the midbrain, and rhombencephalon called as the hindbrain. So if we look at this particular classification, we can also comment that forebrain somewhere lies anteriorly in the skull cap or the skull box. The midbrain lies in the center of the skull, or hindbrain that lies at the posterior or portion which is behind in the cranium. So now forebrain is divided further into telencephalon and diencephalon. Telencephalon contains the cerebral hemispheres, the basal ganglia, the hypothalamus, and the amygdaloid nucleus. A good point to know here is that the hippocampus and the amygdaloid nucleus both control the emotional responses of a person. Whereas the thalamus, hypothalamus, the metathalamus, and the subthalamus form the part of the diencephalon. Mesencephalon or the midbrain do not have any further classifications, whereas rhombencephalon or the part of brain located posteriorly in the cranium divides itself into metencephalon and myelencephalon. Metencephalon divides further into pons and cerebellum, whereas myelencephalon includes the medulla oblongata. Coming to understanding more about the central nervous system. So, as we studied previously, that the central nervous system is divided into your brain and the spinal cord. So, as you can see here, this is the part of the brain, and this brain continues itself as the spinal cord. So, what we can tell from this particular diagram is that the part of brain terminates in the form of medulla oblongata. From your myelencephalon or medulla oblongata extends your spinal cord. So as you can see, the spinal cord is divided into several parts, which we will discuss in the further slides. So this central nervous system is formed by neurons, which as discussed before is the functional unit of the CNS. It is the unit through which the CNS holds its function. And there are supporting cells. Definitely now, if there are functional units, you need something to support these cells to make sure that the repair and damage is taken care of. Those supporting cells are nothing but neuroglia. Now, structures of the brain and spinal cord, whatever structures are there, they are arranged in two layers, namely gray matter and white matter. Now, to understand how the structures are arranged in the CNS, we need to have a look at what is this gray matter and white matter. So, let us differentiate between the two. Composition wise, gray matter has neuron cell bodies. Neuron cell bodies, as I will explain further, is the most important part of a neuron. Neuron cell bodies, the dendrites of the neuron, and unmyelinated fibers. What is myelin? In short, if I tell you, myelin is a protective, fatty, and protein rich layer that wraps itself around the nerve fibers in your body, acting like the plastic insulation on an electrical wire. So basically, myelin is itself a protein. In the neuron, if you see, myelin wraps around the nerve fibers to increase the conduction speed of the neuron. It increases the electrical signal's speed to reach from one neuron to the other, which is why it helps electrical signals move quickly and smoothly from your brain to your rest of the body. Composition wise, neuronal cell bodies, dendrites, and unmyelinated fibers, along with synapses. What is a synapse? Synapse is the junction present between the two neurons. When two neurons connect to each other, they form a synapse. Then, what does white matter be composed of? White matter is composed only of myelinated axons. When we have a bundle of myelinated axons together, they form something called as a nerve fiber tract. They will form a bundle of nerve fibers called as nerve fiber tracts. Color and appearance wise, because of the gray matter, wherever the gray matter is present, it will appear as grayish brown in color. Why? Because we have unmyelinated sheets here. Myelin attributes a kind of color to the neuron. So, the white color which we are able to see is because of the high content of myelin. But since gray matter does not have myelinated fibers, it has unmyelinated fibers, this gray matter lacks the pale lipid of myelin and hence it doesn't appear white. It appears a lighter shade that is grayish brown in color. Hence the name gray matter. And why is that particular matter in the brain or the spinal cord called as white? Because it has a high lipid content because of the myelin protein. Function wise, this gray matter is present at the site of synapses, usually where synapses is synapse is occurring. Two neurons are connecting to each other for processing and integration of information. Gray matter will be seen there. Whereas white matter will be seen in places where conduction has to happen. Information in the form of electrical signals has to reach from one part of the neuron to the other. So conduction happens in the region of conduction where rapid transmission of impulses has to happen between regions. You see white matter. You see myelinated axons. Definitely because you have to have a quick transmission. You have to have a quick conduction. So you need myelinated axons. So whenever we say gray matter, we mean neuronal cell bodies and dendrites and unmyelinated fibers. And whenever the word white matter comes, we mean myelinated axons, meaning those axons which are covered with myelin sheath. So exactly where they are located, outer cortex of the outer cortex of the brain is made up of gray matter, whereas inner or the central region of the brain is located and is having the white matter, inner white matter and outer gray matter. But it is the opposite in the spinal cord. Remember, whenever we talk about brain, it has outer cortex in gray matter and inner region in white matter. Whereas if we come to spinal cord, it's just the opposite. The inner or the central region has gray matter in the spinal cord and the outer cortex has white matter in the spinal cord. So, as I've told previously, location in the spinal cord will be central. Gray matter is centrally located and it will be shaped as an H or a butterfly shaped region in the spinal cord. Whereas it will be a peripheral region of white matter in the spinal cords, which is arranged in columns called as funiculi. So, whenever we mean gray matter is equal to nerve cell bodies plus nerve cell dendrites plus unmyelinated fibers, which is why it appears gray. And whenever we mean white fibers, we mean myelinated axons and neurons, only which are fast in conduction. Now coming to the functional parts of a neuron. So, as we can see here, totally the neuron has 9 parts. The first part of a neuron is a dendrite. If you can see this structure, this is the dendrite. This dendrite appears like a tree branch. Why it is in the form of a tree branch? Why is it so much expanded? The reason is that the more the expansions in the form of dendrites, the more is the reception of information. The more properly, because neuron has the work of delivering information. So the farther and the larger the dendrites, the more expansile the dendrites, more the information that can be captured from a certain area in the brain or the spinal cord. So the better the expansibility of these dendrites, more information can be gathered, more information can be received, and more information can thereby be transmitted. So Dendrites are the tree branch-like structures that help to receive the information. The information then comes inside your cell body. This portion is called as the cell body. Cell body is also called as your soma or perikaryon. Perikaryon. This particular part of the neuron is the most important one. It has a centrally located nucleus situated. The nucleus is one. And the speciality of this nucleus is that this nucleus, like other cells in the body, does not have a centrosome. So, what is centrosome? Centrosome is basically a structure that helps in cell division. The process of cell division is called as mitosis, and the centrosome plays a very important role in the cell division. Whenever cell has to divide from 1 into 2, it plays a very important role. But since the nucleus in the nerve cell, in the neuron, does not have a nucleus, this particular nerve cell cannot multiply. This particular neuron, just like other cells, do multiplication, but a neuron or a nerve cell cannot multiply because it does not possess this centrosome, which is important for cell division or mitosis. Moving to the next part, you have an axon. So, axon is a structure that is in lengthwise. It is a structure that transmits the information, and it is a tail like structure. It is a structure that helps to support the transmission of impulses, of electrical impulses across its length. So, this axon is of two types. Either, depending on the type of fiber, this axon can be myelinated, that is, it can be covered with myelin protein, or it can be unmyelinated. So, this gives us one type of classification of neurons into myelinated and non myelinated fibers. So, because myelin sheath helps to conduct impulses fast, this axon has the myelin sheath in the form of nodes. Now, myelin sheath is spread across the entire length of the axon, no doubt. But there are certain places in a neuron which is exposed and which does not have the myelin sheath covered around them. As you can see here in the other parts of the neuron, the axon is well covered with myelin sheath. But there are some stations or there are some places in the neuron where the axon is exposed or it is open. These are known as the nodes of Ranvier. These are called as nodes of Ranvier. These nodes of Ranvier do not have a covering of myelin over them. Because of these nodes of Ranvier, there is something called as a saltatory conduction or jumping up of impulses. So as the impulse comes from the dendrite, it enters the soma, it comes to the nodes or the nodes of Ranvier, and they hop from one place to the other like this. Rather than simply going across the length of the axon, it will take more time. If the impulse goes continuously in a straight line, it will take more time in conduction. But we want fast conduction, we want quick conduction. That is what is a speciality of our nervous system. So, the information or the impulse keeps on hopping from one place, one node to the other, one node of Ranvier to the other node of Ranvier, thus conducting the impulse fast, and it is known as saltatory conduction. Next comes the axon terminals. So these are the terminals or the end branches of the axon. So these axon terminals basically will be embedded in your effector organs. What are effector organs? This axon may be transmitting the impulse to an effector. It may be a muscle, or it may be another neuron, or it may be some other tissue to which we are sending impulses. So, this axon terminals are small nerve endings that will be ending up in the effector organ. Next is the nasal granules. So, we come to what is a neuron. So, the structural and functional unit of the nervous system that makes the nervous system a highly specialized and excitable cell. Adapted to generate, it will also generate and it will also conduct electrical impulses. So, because as we discussed earlier, neurons cannot divide because there is absent centrosome in the nucleus, and they will include some of the longest cells in the human body. So let us read through this. Cell body contains the nucleus and the organelles and acts as the main metabolic center of the neuron. As we saw, the cell body doesn't have its own shape and it is constituted by a mass of cytoplasm called as the nucleoplasm or the neuroplasm, which is covered by a cell membrane specially designed for the neuron. And the cytoplasm also contains a large nucleus, nasal bodies, neurofibrils, mitochondria, and a Golgi apparatus like other organs. Coming to the dendrites are short branching processes whose main work is to receive the impulses. The axon has the work of conducting those impulses away from the cell body. Also, there is a specialized structure called as the axon hillock. Axon hillock, axon hillock is this conical portion. The axon hillock is this conical portion that is coming out from the soma or the cell body that is the site where the nerve impulse is generated. This is the place where nerve impulse is generated in a neuron. Myelin sheath, as discussed, is a fatty insulating layer made up by the Schwann cell. So, to tell you, Schwann cell is again one type of supporting cell. It comes under the category of neuroglia. We will see neuroglia in the upcoming slides. These Schwann cells make the myelin sheath. If there is somebody who is preparing myelin sheath, they are the Schwann cells. And because of this myelin sheath, the conduction speed is increased. The rate of conduction of impulses becomes fast. And nodes of Ranvier, lastly, they are gaps in myelin sheath where the myelin sheath is exposed. And this is the place where solitary conduction takes place, meaning the impulses hop. They jump rather than walking in a straight line, which ends up reducing the duration for an impulse to travel from one region of the neuron to the other. Lastly, axon terminals or synaptic knobs that ends in the effector organ, like they may be a neuron, they may be the effector organ may be a gland, the effector organ may be a muscle, which actually has to follow the command that is given by the neuron. Now, coming to the most interesting part of the neuron, that is the nasal bodies or the nasal granules. The nasal granules are small basophilic granules in the cytoplasm of a nucleus. So, if you can see this nasal granules are present in the soma, that is the cell body of the neuron, and they are also present in the dendrites of the neuron. These nasal bodies are called tigroid substances. Tigroid, somewhere taking origin from the word tiger. Tigroid. Why? Because these bodies or these granules help your neuron to look like the skin of a tiger. As you can see in the picture also, they give the neuron a spotted appearance, like that skin of the tiger. And whenever staining is done, this particular neuron appears spotted because of tigroid bodies. After the staining, after you color this particular neuron cell under a microscope to study using the stains or the dyes, you see that the dendrites are distinguished from the axons by means of this particular nasal bodies. Because when you stain a neuron, the nasal granules give a tiger-like appearance, whereas the axons do not give a tiger-like appearance since they don't have the nasal granules. Hence, you can separate the axon from the neuronal cell body. So these bodies, what do they do since they are spotted? Basically, these nasal granules are concerned with the synthesis of proteins in the neurons because they contain ribosomes. These nasal granules contain ribosomes, and that is the reason why they can generate proteins inside the neuron. So, proteins which are formed in the dendrite or they may be formed in the soma of the neuron, they are transported to the axon by axonal flow, meaning whatever is the axonal transmission, in whichever direction is the axonal transmission, through that axonal transmission or axonal flow, the protein synthesized in the cell body of the neuron is transmitted to the axon because axon also needs the proteins. Now, the number of nasal bodies may vary with the condition of the nerve. The most important term here is the condition of the nerve. What does condition of the nerve mean? Say, for example, during heavy exercise, the muscle or the nerve may get fatigued. It may get tired or it may get fatigued, or maybe any injury to a nerve may happen, any neuronal injury may happen, due to which these bodies may fragment, they might break apart into pieces, or they might fully disappear based on the degree of the injury. That process is called as chromatolysis. So, when the process of chromatolysis happens, that the nerve is injured, the nerve is fatigued, obviously nasal granules might uh, disappear from that particular neuron, or they might break into pieces and be visible under a microscope. The process is termed as chromatolysis. But as and when recovery from fatigue happens, or after the nerve regenerates, the nasal granules may be again visible on the microscope. Next, we now go to neuroglia or the supporting cells. As discussed previously, these neuroglia are also called as glial cells. These glial cells are non-neuronal cells, meaning they are the cells apart from the neuron in the central nervous system. Those structures which are not neuronal, meaning they are something apart from the neurons, which will support, nourish, and protect the neurons. Definitely, neurons are a system. In the system, you have to take care of the neurons. So, there should be some cells which should take care of the neurons. They should support the cells, provide nutrition to the neurons, they should protect the neurons from injury. So, what they state is the number of the glial cells or the neuroglial cells outnumber neurons, meaning they are present way more in number than the neurons. Because one neuron may require a lot of glial cells to take care, repair the neurons, because neurons themselves are in millions and trillions of amounts. So, to protect, to nourish each and every neuron may require multiples of cells more than the number of neuron itself. So, the number of glial cells in a neuronal system are more than the neuron themselves. And unlike neurons, retain the ability to divide. Glial cells can divide, but neurons cannot divide. Okay. Now, there are two type of glial cells. One glial cells that will be in the central nervous system, that is they will be in the brain and the spinal cord, whereas glial cells in the peripheral nervous system, that is they may be in the cranial nerves or they may be in the spinal nerves. Okay. Glial cells in the central nervous system are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. Now, what are astrocytes? Astro stands for something that is in the shape of a star. These astrocytes provide structural support and form the part of blood-brain barrier. Now to tell you, blood-brain barrier is a kind of system of blood vessels. The blood-brain barrier is a system of blood vessels that takes care of not giving any kind of infection to your brain. A system that protects your brain from any infections. That is the system of blood-brain barrier, which contains blood vessels also, and yes, it contains some types of immune cells. So astrocytes form a major part of this blood-brain barrier, and it helps to give a structural support to the neurons. Oligodendrocytes, on the other hand, are responsible for production of myelin sheath across the CNS exons. They will produce myelin sheath along with Schwann cells. They will assist the Schwann cells in production of the myelin sheath around the neurons. Microglia, on the other hand, act like resident immune or phagocytic cells. So basically, if you want to protect the brain, you have to have some immune cells with you, meaning those cells which, as soon as see a foreign body inside the brain, run towards it and come to eat it. There should be some cells who directly attack the foreign agents in your brain to avoid infection. So these resident immune or phagocytic cells, what is phagocytic come from? Where does phagocytic come from? It comes from the word phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is nothing but cell eating. Phagocytosis is cell eating. In a good way, immune cells eat up. Immune cells eat up the foreign bodies that come in your brain. So, the immune property of your brain is attributed to presence of microglia cells. Lastly, ependymal cells, which line the ventricles in your brain. Ventricles are basically cavities that produce and circulate the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid in your brain. So this particular ependymal cells lines your ventricles and is involved in cerebrospinal fluid production also and circulation also across the entire CNS. Now, glial cells in PNS or peripheral nervous system are two types. First, Schwann cells, as they produce myelin sheath around the axons of the cranial nerves and spinal nerves, and satellite cells, which support and surround the neuron cell bodies within the peripheral ganglia. Next, we come to the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is basically the type of nervous system which is divided by function into somatic nervous system, that is a nervous system that helps you have voluntary control of your movements. For example, we are able to contract our biceps muscle on our own choice because we have a voluntary control over the biceps muscle through the somatic nervous system. But functions such as your digestion, then the respiration, these are the functions which are not under our voluntary control. So functions such as the functions of glands, this function of the smooth or cardiac muscles is not under our control. That Functions which are not under our control, which are involuntary functions, are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, this autonomic nervous system is further divided into sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. To explain this, let me give you an example. The sympathetic division of nerves are a system of those nerves which will help you to regulate your body in a fear, fight, or flight reaction. Fear, fight, or flight reaction. Say, for example, a dog is running behind you. This is a type of fear, fight, and flight reaction. It is not a case where you can rest somewhere. Definitely, you have to run. For running, you may need an increased oxygen demand. The demand of oxygen increases in your body. You may need increased volume of blood to circulate inside your body. You may also need dilated pupil because you want to see around the places where you are running. Or you may also need more blood to increase your overall metabolism. So, this particular response is taken care by the sympathetic division of your nerves. These sympathetic division of your nerves are those nerves which arise from T1 to L2 spinal segments. They will be those nerves which come out from T1 part of your spinal cord until your L2 part of spinal cord. That is termed as thoracolumbar outflow. Thoracolumbar outflow will increase heart rate, dilate or increase the size of your pupils so that you are able to visualize the surroundings around you as to where you are running. It will divert blood to your muscles. Now, obviously, you have 5 liters of blood running inside your body. When you need more blood in your body in a fear, fight, and flight reaction, obviously, you cannot feed more blood from outside. You have to manage the increased demand in this 5 liters only. So, what is taken care of is the blood from your digestive system because you don't need the function of digestion at that point of time when you're running. So, the blood from your digestive system, that is your visceral organs of the abdominal cavity, are pulled. The digestion process is slowed down. The metabolism in the abdominal cavity is slowed down a little. You don't need blood to be flowing excessively in your excretory system. You don't feel the need to defecate or urinate in the fear, fight, and flight response. So, blood from your excretory system, your digestive systems, which don't have a role in this fear, fight, and flight reaction, is diverted to the places in your body which require more blood. Like your heart requires more blood. Yes, blood is diverted to that area. You need more blood in your pupils for your eye muscles to give more dilation in your pupils. Yes, your blood is diverted from these areas of digestion, excretion to the areas where it is needed more. So, your lungs may need more blood, it is diverted there. Hence, functions which do not have any relation to your fear, fight, and flight response are slowed down in your body. And this particular system of nerves prepares your body to control that stress or emergency. The very contrary of which is the parasympathetic division, that is also called as the rest and digest response, that helps you sit at one place, digest your food. Okay, this particular response or this particular system of nerves is called as craniosacral outflow. Why? Because it is controlled by cranial nerves and the sacral spinal segments, meaning those particular nerves which arise from S2, S3, and S4 segments of your spinal cord. So to highlight here, the spinal cord is divided into segments, which we will discuss in the further slides. So these segments S2, S3, S4 along with control from cranial nerves decides the parasympathetic response. This response decreases your heart rate because you're not in an emergency. A normal or a reduced heart rate, it constricts your pupil. You don't need to focus so much on your surroundings. Even if pupils remain constricted, they remain small, it's okay. Stimulates the digestion. Yes, you are at a state of rest, you will want to digest. And the glandular secretion, that means it activates your glands to secrete hormones or secrete secretions like your saliva or your tears. And this particular response, whenever it is activated, parasympathetic division conserves and restores energy. So, depending on the situation, although sympathetic and parasympathetic division both are activated in your body, there is a balance that is present between the two. It is not that parasympathetic division is shut down when you are in the situation of a sympathetic response, but there is a balance between the two at rest. Whenever there is a need to specifically stimulate the sympathetic or parasympathetic supply or the divisions, the body takes control of predominantly one division. But it is not that if one division is activated, the other completely shuts down. No, they are antagonistic or opposite to each other. But it is not that if one division is activated, other stops and shuts itself. No, not at all. There is a balance between the two always that is established. So, as we can see in this diagram, the parasympathetic division is called as the rest and digest response. So, it helps you to constrict your pupil, it helps you in salivation, airways in your respiratory system constrict because you don't have a lot of increased O2 demand when you are at a state of rest. Heart rate will slow down. Yes, it will come to a normal heart rate. Stomach is successfully doing digestion, intestine are doing digestion, bladder constricts, then is why you feel the need to urinate. You may not feel the need to urinate when you are running away from a dog, for example, and reproductive system also increases the blood flow. But in contrary to this, if you develop a fear, fight, and flight response, you may need to keep your pupils dilated in a state of maximum awareness. Saliva is inhibited. Airways become dilated because your oxygen demand increases. Heart rate increases. Stomach inhibits the digestion. Stomach says, no, I don't want to digest at this point of time. The major goal is to run away from the dogs. Liver releases glucose. Intestines give away digestion process as of now. Kidneys release adrenaline that again excites your muscles. Your bladder relaxes. That makes you not urinate at this point of time. And the reproductive system decreases the blood flow. Next, coming to major divisions of the CNS. So, as we saw in the preceding slides, that the CNS is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. Together, they act as the master center of the body and they are divided into four parts. The brain is divided into four parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon, of which we will be discussing in the next video. Today's focus is mainly on the spinal cord, its parts, and its organization. So, now what is the spinal cord location? Many people believe that the vertebral column is the spinal cord. No, the vertebral column is only a bony arrangement. It's an arrangement of it's an arrangement of bones called as the vertebrae. This bony arrangement of vertebrae forms the spinal column or the vertebral column. This vertebral column has at the center a vertebral canal that transmits the spinal cord to it. So, vertebral column is not equal to the spinal cord. Spinal cord is a bunch of nerve fibers. It is a bunch of nerve fibers that is transmitted via the vertebral canal present in vertebral columns. First, make this clear. So, this particular vertebral column has spinal cord. The spinal cord extends from the foramen magnum. Now, what is foramen magnum? If you can see this diagram on the left, this particular structure that you can see is the skull, or more exactly, it's the skull base. This skull base is covered from the top by the skull cap. So, as you can see in this diagram, this particular largest foramen at the base of the skull, is called as the foramen magnum. It is the largest foramen present in your skull and it transmits your spinal cord. It transmits the meninges and it transmits the blood vessels beneath or below this. So, what are meninges? Meninges are the coverings of the brain or the spinal cord. As of now, remember this much, that the meninges are the coverings of the brain or the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord starts its way. As I told you, the spinal cord starts from medulla oblongata, which is the terminal portion of your brain. Your brain finishes at the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata then continues as the spinal cord. So, this spinal cord arises from the foramen magnum. This foramen magnum is present at the level of L1 or L2 vertebrae in the adults. Average length of the spinal cord is 42 to 45 centimeter and it is continuous above with medulla oblongata. This particular spinal cord is enclosed within the vertebral canal, as I told. It is surrounded by meninges, that is the coverings, protective coverings of the spine or the spinal cord and the brain. And also it has the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid floating around it. What are the key external features of the spinal cord? There is a section in the spinal cord that is called as the cervical enlargement. Cervical enlargement is present at the level of C5 to L1. Why is it called as an enlargement? Because this is a collection of nerve fibers. This is an area of collection of nerve fibers which makes it appear a little larger in size as compared to the entire spinal cord. So, cervical enlargement is a group of C5 to T1 origin of nerves that supply the upper limb. On the contrary, you also have a lumbar enlargement present at the level of L2 lumbar vertebrae and S3 sacral vertebrae, where you have origin of nerves supplying the lower limb. So you have one enlargement at the cervical level, one enlargement at the lumbar level. Why you call it an enlargement? Because it appears a little larger in size as compared to the entire spinal cord. Then you have conus medullaris. Conus medullaris is basically a tapering cone-shaped lower cord of the lower part of the spinal cord. It tapers, it reduces in size, and it becomes cone-shaped as the spinal cord ends. Spinal cord ends in phylum terminale. What is phylum terminale? It is a fibrous extension anchoring the cord, spinal cord to the coccyx. Now you have to have a connection of the spinal cord to some bone of your pelvis. The bone located in the posterior part of your pelvis is the coccyx. This spinal cord is connected to the coccyx using phylum terminale. So you have the spinal cord ending as phylum terminale. So just imagine the spinal cord to be a bundle of nerve fibers. This bundle of nerve fibers originates as a bundle or a collection at like a ponytail as a collection of fibers in the end. So these will be your nerve tracts of the spinal cord. This is entirely your spinal cord, and then this spinal cord ends in a ponytail like structure called the phylum terminale. What is cauda equina? Cauda equina is a bundle of nerve roots below the conus medullaris. So, below conus medullaris ending, there is nerve roots which bundle after the conus medullaris called as the cauda equina. Why is it termed equina? Equina refers to the horse. And since these nerve roots end after the conus medullaris, they resemble a tail of the horse. Now, next, we move to finally the structure of the spinal cord. So, this which we studied previously, the conus medullaris, the cauda equina, are the external features. Now we will read about the spinal cord internal structure. Before that, let me tell you that spinal nerves are 31 in pairs, meaning left side one spinal nerve will be there, right side one spinal nerve will be there. Hence, it is called as a spinal nerve pair. And there are 31 pair of spinal nerves, as you can see in this diagram. Blue colored structures, that is, there's a central spinal cord. From the spinal cord, you have emerging nerve roots. Emerging or exiting nerve roots. Exiting nerve roots. Exiting or emerging nerve roots come from the spinal cord, and they go and supply appropriate parts of your upper limb, maybe your face, or maybe they may supply your upper limb, your lower limb, or your thoracic muscles. Then, coming to the parts in which these nerve groups are divided, they are divided into cervical nerve roots, thoracic nerve roots, lumbar nerve roots, sacral nerve roots, and finally the cauda equina. These nerve roots or nerve pairs are divided on the basis of their location. Cervical nerve roots, yes, are present in the cervical region, correspond to cervical vertebrae in the vertebral column. Thoracic nerve roots will be exiting from thoracic vertebrae of the vertebral column. Lumbar nerve roots will exit from lumbar vertebrae of the vertebral column. Sacral nerve roots exiting from the sacral part of the vertebral column or sacral vertebrae of the vertebral column. And lastly, they end into a cauda equina. So there are 8 cranial nerve pairs in uh, cervical spinal nerves, 12 pair of thoracic spinal nerves, 5 pairs of lumbar spinal nerves, 5 pairs of sacral spinal nerves, and lastly ending as cauda equina. Then to come to a cross section now, if you want to study the spinal cord, basically you have to divide it in a transverse plane. What is a transverse plane? It's a horizontal plane that you use to study the structure of the spinal cord. So, this cross section of the spinal cord is divided into gray matter, white matter, and a central canal. Now, gray matter is placed in the center and it is a butterfly shaped structure. Dorsal horn, that is posterior horn, it has a posterior horn, it has a ventral horn, and it has a lateral horn. So how many parts does the gray matter has? Gray matter is itself a butterfly-shaped structure having a dorsal or a posterior horn, which is sensory in nature, meaning it has something to do with the sensations. There is a ventral or an anterior horn that is something to do with the motor or the muscle supply. And there is a lateral horn that has autonomic control, that has something to do with the autonomic nervous system. Next is the white matter, which is placed peripherally, that is around the gray matter, and it is organized into columns or bundles of nerve fibers into dorsal. The literal meaning of dorsal is posterior, lateral, and ventral, that is anterior funiculi. Funiculi is nothing but columns of ascending, meaning those nerve fibers going upwards, and descending, those nerve bundles that go downwards. What is the meaning of tracts? Tracts means a collection of nerve fibers. Lastly, in cross section, in when you divide the nerve, when you divide the spinal cord, you see a section. Lastly, it contains the central canal, which is a cavity that has the cerebrospinal fluid filled inside it at the center of gray matter. That is called as a central canal. Now, once you look at this diagram, you will realize that this is a transverse section image. What is it? It's a transverse section or a horizontal cut section of the spinal cord. Now, this particular this particular spinal section has various parts. First, coming to sensory pathway, the first component is sensory pathway. What is a sensory pathway now? Sensory pathway, if you look at the diagram, it shows you sensory pathway literally stands for a pathway that sends sensations. A pathway that sends sensations to your brain. It lets your brain know what are the various sensations of pain, touch, pressure, temperature, or vibration that your body is feeling at the moment. So it should tell your brain, it should inform your brain. So that is the sensory pathway. The sensory pathway starts from the sensory pathway starts from a stimulus. The stimulus can be, as I've told, it can be touch stimulus, it can be pain stimulus, it can be pressure stimulus, it can be vibration stimulus. Okay. This stimulus may come or be sensed by a receptor. Like, say, for example, for touch, you have the cutaneous touch receptors present on your skin, which help you realize the sensation of touch. This receptor will catch hold of the stimulus and send it to the sensory neuron. It will send it to the sensory neuron. What is a sensory neuron? It is a neuron that will receive the sensation from the receptor and transmit it further. So, your sensory pathway gets a sensory neuron through the receptor, and then it converts and goes to the dorsal root. What is a dorsal root? Dorsal root is that it is that part of your nervous system that collects information from a sensory neuron and is located in the posterior part of the vertebral or the spinal column. Okay. This dorsal root sends information to your spinal cord and finally to the brain. So, as you can see here, the sensory pathway, it comes from your receptor, which is situated somewhere here. Receptor will receive the information. It will send it to the dorsal root via the sensory neuron and send it to the spinal cord. Then there is an interneuron located in the center. What is the role of an interneuron? Its work is to detect sensory signals and decide or communicate the senses to the effector part of the circle, or it will help you to communicate the sensations so that appropriate action can be taken. That part of the nervous system, or the that part of your spinal nerve that will transmit the action to that respective muscle where effect has to occur, is called as the ventral root or the motor root. Dorsal root is sensory, it takes away the sensations. Ventral root is motor, which will only decide the effect of that particular sensation, and it will most probably locate itself on the muscles, because muscle is that particular part of your body that needs to respond to a stimulus. Say, for example, you are touching a, a wig which is lighted up in fire. If as soon as you miss that particular wig, you remove your hand from there, and that is where your muscle has to provide a stimulus. Your muscle has to have the action to remove your hand from that lighted wig. Okay. So now this is first part of your spinal cord. This particular part is the first part of your spinal cord. Then coming to the second part is the gray matter. Now this is the gray matter of your spinal cord. The outer portion is the gray matter. So this particular gray matter, this particular gray matter is located centrally. It is located centrally, is butterfly shaped as I told before, and it contains firstly cell bodies of the neurons. It contains cell bodies of the neurons as previously discussed. It contains interneurons. What are interneurons? Interneurons are those neurons that help to establish connection between sensory and motor neurons. It helps to establish a connection between sensory and motor neurons. This particular gray matter is shaped in the form of an H or a butterfly. So it has a dorsal horn. The dorsal horn is The dorsal horn is present in the posterior part, dorsal horn. It has a ventral horn and it has a lateral horn that projects laterally. Lastly, you have a central canal situated in the center that helps and that contains the CSF inside your central canal. You have a CSF floating and circulating inside the central canal. This particular CSF provides nourishment. It's a fluid. It provides nourishment and protection to nervous tissue. So, this is a diagram that basically will help you to draw. You will be helped in drawing. It's a simplified form of the diagram of the spinal cord. You can draw it this way in your exams. Then in this video, so far we have covered how is the CNS organized, how is the PNS organized. Also, we looked at the internal structure of the spinal cord. In the next video, we will be talking about what are the types of neurons, what are the types of nerve fibers, what are the properties of nerve fibers, then what is degeneration and regeneration process in a nerve fiber, and what are the various types of receptors in your central nervous system. So, if you've understood and enjoyed this class, you can avail free notes by joining to the community, the link of which is provided in the description, and that gives way to free notes of this class. Thank you.